And we are back with another episode of ClubCast, episode 7. Obviously, a lot to talk about. A lot of stuff has happened just in this week, and including yesterday. So a little bit late to the news. We'll just get started right away. Um, Yesterday, kind of a shocking news. Boston Red Sox fired President of Baseball Ops Chaim Bloom or Chaim Bloom. Chaim Bloom?
Who knows,
Yeah,
man?
one or the other. But he's out in Boston. He was there for 4 years. I would say the biggest thing about his tenure there that's probably going to follow him the rest of his career is, he'll be known as the guy that traded Mookie Betts and kickstarted their rebuild shortly after the 2018 World Series. He replaced current Phillies president of baseball ops Dave Dombrowski, who in his time there did bring a championship to Boston. So, like you said, flags fly forever. But in the process, kind of tightened up the pockets of the Boston Red Sox owners by going over the luxury tax for multiple years in a row and trading away pretty much every top prospect they had in win now mode. That's something that Dave Dombrowski has been known to do because he's a winning GM, winning president of baseball operations. So if you hire him, you're going to go all in. The Red Sox hire someone from the Rays system in Bloom, and we'll get into it a little bit more, but just off face value, the Red Sox, they're technically still are in playoff contention, but they've kind of died off, especially now we're getting like less than 2 weeks, a little bit more than 2 weeks left of the season. So it's looking like they're going to be finishing either 4th or 5th place in a very competitive division. So I know we're not Red Sox fans. We don't really talk about the Red Sox like that, but it's always interesting when somebody gets fired either mid-season or in this case, it's pretty late to get fired. Usually this stuff would happen maybe after the season's over, or maybe like I thought he would have gotten maybe one more off season to see if they could do anything, but a lot of these teams aren't taking any chances, and he's out in Boston. So I kind of want to get your thoughts on that. Just spitting ball on it,
Yeah, I think what you said at the end really kind of I felt the same way as you. It's like September firing is a very different firing than an October firing. You know what I mean? After that year's over and you part ways with your GM or something like that, it makes sense. But for a guy like you talked about, that's all he's going to be known for is going to be coming in after they went on this big run with Dave Dombrowski, the guy who builds championships, and they needed a guy to come in and rebuild. So what do? They go get a guy from the Rays organization, like you said, one of the best run organizations in all of sports, and task him to trade one of the best players in baseball history. Like you said, he's going to kick off his Dodgers Hall of Fame career. But yeah, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I get not winning, but he wasn't in a great position. When he took over in 2019, he had the 30th ranked farm system. They had $220 million in payroll, and they had 7 contracts of over $50 million. And none of these guys are like younger than 28. So it's kind of a rough spot. I know it's been almost 5 years for him now. I like winning too. He has had some success there, but it's a little rough for me coming in September. Just how it all went down, I think.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a couple of things I would take away from it. So first thing is, Dombrowski did bring a championship to the city. And at the end of the day, for a market like Boston, New York, LA, Philly, those are the cities that really are defined by championships rather than just say winning seasons. Mm-hmm. And he accomplished that. They went into a different direction because they realized that they couldn't continue going over the luxury tax, even though they are the Boston Red Sox. They can pretty much afford to do whatever they wanted to do. So they went with a direction, and they hired someone from the Rays system And we all know how the Rays play. You know, they don't have the largest payroll, but they continue to find ways to win because they're excellent at drafting, they're excellent at scouting, and they're excellent at player development. So those are three things that Chaim Bloom, actually did. He brought the Red Sox farm system actually went up, I think, 10 ranks in his time there. They've had multiple prospects that are now in the top 100. Obviously, my favorite, Marcelo Meyer, who they drafted 2 years ago, is one of their top prospects that they have a lot of faith in. So, you know, if that's one of the check boxes that he needed to do, he definitely did that because now the Red Sox are set up for the future. Financially, they wanted some flexibility and they tried to extend Mookie Betts, and he was very adamant that he was going to test out free agency after the 2020 season. Obviously, threw a curveball in there with the 2020 year because of COVID, but they already traded him in the offseason, and they had no idea what was going to happen because they got a lot of heat because Betts ended up signing an extension with the Dodgers that year. And you could probably just say due to the uncertainty that was going to happen in the offseason that year, because many players didn't think there was going to be a season at all. And the Dodgers took that opportunity, and Betts took that opportunity and said, you know what, this is probably the best offer I'm going to get right now, so let me take it. But when he was in Boston, he thought he was going to challenge Mike Trout's contract extension. He wanted something similar, and I think Bloom is kind of the scapegoat when it comes to this, because when you trade superstars, it's not the GM's decision. Like, obviously, he's the one that initiates it and gets the job done. Like, he chooses what team to send into and what players to take. But it was reported multiple times that it was owner John Henry. And I've seen, like, Jared Carrabis has said this. There's a couple other YouTubers that I've seen on that cover the Red Sox, that are Red Sox fans, and they said the same thing. Mm-hmm. Henry and Betts did not have a good relationship, and they were ready to move on. And that's the ownership group really was the one that said, you know, Betts isn't going to sign the extension. Let's get him out of here now. I honestly want to see what your take is, because, you know, I think the writing is on the wall that the Boston Red Sox definitely lost the Betts trade. And it's definitely something because at the time, the Dodgers sent over one of their top prospects. I'm trying to forget his name, Jeter Downs.
Yeah.
And they also sent over Connor Wong, who's still on the team as a backup catcher. And they obviously parted way with Alex Verdugo, who's had a very up and down career in Boston, not only on the field but off the field. Against the fans, he's kind of been 50-50 there, and he's not having the best of seasons there this year. So, and there was a lot of rumors that they were looking to trade him this year, and he's most likely going to walk in. I think he's a free agent at the end of this year or next year. So I'm interested to see, do you agree with that sentiment that the Red Sox pretty much lost the Betts trade?
Yeah, I think you have to at this point. They haven't really won much since. Like you said, it's a whole organizational decision when you trade a guy like that of Mookie Betts' caliber. I mean, the first thing why I would say is because the Dodgers won the World Series in 2020. I mean, it's kind of obvious. But when you trade a guy like Mookie Betts, like Juan Soto, like somebody like that, you want a return package that's going to build you for the future. The Nationals they got Abrams, they got Keeper Ruiz, they got Josiah Gray in other trades to build this whole kind of, you know, organization. I think if you're going to part ways with a guy of Mookie Betts' caliber, you have to build with other guys around those guys too. It's not just a one thing. Okay, now let's start again. Like it's one move into another move into another move. Like you said, it was so much payroll and so many things. They could do what they want. It was just a tough situation that I don't think was carried out enough. But again, not a lot of development there with the guys that we're talking about. So you kind of have to put it on both ends of the spectrum. Like front office wasn't very good, but the guys on the field didn't really give you much to back it up. But yeah, I think it's pretty obvious what you said. I think the Dodgers won that trade.
Yeah, and then the only thing to go off of this whole ordeal with the Red Sox firing Bloom is the Mets kind of did the same thing. I don't think they fired their current GM or president of baseball ops yet, but they hired David Stearns from the Brewers. Um, right, and he's still on the Brewers. Like he's in control of the team that they have this year. So you're seeing a lot of teams make moves now, getting ahead of the curve. As a lot of teams, it seems, are going to start changing direction. So that's definitely going to be a big thing in the offseason because I already started seeing Shohei rumors to Boston because of New Balance, who we signed a deal with. And I think Red Sox owner John Henry has a major stake in that company. So there is already a relationship there. So depending on who they bring in, some GMs that are new GMs want to make their mark on a team. So who knows? Maybe they go out and get Ohtani. But it's definitely going to be something to watch this year. Something else to watch this year that's been happening the past couple years is the amount of young talent that's been infiltrating the sport of baseball. It seems every year, we've talked about it before too, that just the game is getting younger and it's getting better than ever. A lot of these guys are coming up straight from the minor leagues and expected to be all-stars, and a lot of them have lived up to that expectation. And there's a bunch of guys that when you look at them, are their teams gonna take the Atlanta Braves route and get these guys signed long term to either build around them or just to keep them on their current playoff contenders? So I'm interested to see what players or players that you would lock up right now that are young studs that could definitely be the face of a franchise.
Yeah, I think I picked a few that I'm familiar with, obviously, but I think the broad category for this is those in between guys, not the guys that you're gonna be like that guy's a fucking stud. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't see, Julio Rodriguez going out here and signing a 10-year, $200 million contract anytime soon. But those guys that you really want to look for are those in between guys. Somebody who would take more control and more, safety for a little bit of a discount. Something like Albies. I'm going to bring up the Braves, but Albies did. Michael Harris took a big one. We can say Wander Franco and then move on from that. But it's just those guys that aren't going to be the superstars, but the ones in between. I think one on my team that I need locked up is obviously Bryson Stott. We've been talking about it all this time. This year probably wouldn't be the best just because this is his breakout year. He's hitting close to 300. He's actually getting on the map a little bit, it seems like, in mainstream media. But I think within the next couple of years, before you get to those last 2 years of team control, I think guys like Bryson Stott, Alec Boehm, if you see him in your future, you need to start giving these guys contracts because inflation is incredible. I mean, we're seeing it, the rapid inflation over the last, decade or two of every sport, that these teams are multiplying, 10 plus 10x every year. And these contracts are going to keep getting bigger and bigger. I mean, only more merch is being bought, more tickets, more TV deals, all this kind of stuff. The money's got to go somewhere. The contract's going to keep going up. The earlier you get in, it doesn't matter if you think you're overpaying. The Bryce Harper thing, it's a little bit different, but everybody thought they overpaid him because it's $300 million. But look at it now. Random people, regular people are getting $300 million. It's a thing where it will always look good in the future unless you find some, really crazy bust, obviously. But that's where you kind of have to have that middle ground like the Braves do, where they're like, okay, our superstars like, Riley and people like that can get not an upper echelon, but upper for them. And then you have the guys like Harris and people like that who could be good that are kind of getting those mid-level deals.
Yeah. I look at this in a couple ways. And I've seen some of the contracts that have gotten done before with young athletes, especially the past couple of years. You mentioned the Braves, just to spitball some of their contract stats, which I thought were kind of shocking, especially for Acuna, because I want to know who his agent is. I said it when he signed the contract a couple of years ago. That's highway robbery because no matter which way you shake it, I mean, I think right now, I think he's clearly going to win the MVP. Betts missed a couple days, and Acuna hasn't really slowed down with regardless of any stats on offense. So I think he's leaning towards that way of winning his first MVP. The fact that they were able to sign him to an 8-year, $100 million contract kind of seems like they held him at gunpoint. Or they took advantage of him being a Latin player and his Latin agent, because they definitely fleeced this deal. Because not only did it buy out all of his arbitration years, but it got him past that as well for around 17 AAV per year, which that's what some guys are making in arbitration, and they have him at that for the remainder of his contract, and they got him at the peak of his performance. Because he did miss a season with the ACL injury, but it seems like he's fully healed from that. Obviously, another one that you mentioned was Ozzy Albies. They signed him to a 7-year, $35 million contract. How is that even possible? My man is making like $5 million a year. There's some ARB guys on the Dodgers or like past players that are making more than that, and they kind of I don't know. Like, I know you're a Phillies fan, and like we've heard like Mets fans like Josh and all them, like when they talk about it, but I mean, he's still one of the better second basemen in baseball. Like he's one of the best hitting second basemen, and he plays an elite glove. He's a bat in that lineup that scares me as a Dodgers fan. Like, I've seen him go off against my team, so I'm like, you know what? That's a good guy. Then you look at his contract, and you're like, how's he making only $5 million a year? That makes no sense. There's some rookies that are making more than that when they get their contract purchased and stuff. So there's some guys making that money when they sign out of like high school or college. Like, they're already making more. And then Austin Riley, he's one of the better third basemen, maybe not the best, but he's a young third baseman, and that's been a hole that the Braves have had for a while. So they locked him up to a 10-year, $212 million contract. So around $20-ish million per year. So, they got him to a really good deal with that one. I will correct you on one. J-Rod did sign an extension last year.
You're right.
And they signed it to a weird big deal because I was looking at how it was broken down. So it's technically right now a 7-year, $105 million deal.
Right.
It has a club option after the 7th year to be an 8-year or 10-year deal, and it goes from 105 to either 200 or $350 million, depending on if he opts in.
Right.
And if he takes the max one, which would be opting in for the whole 10 years, it would be the largest contract in MLB history, spanning years. It's a 10-year contract for $470 million. So he's going to be there for a while. And a similar deal was done with Corbin Carroll, just a lot less money, but similar club option years towards the end. Because depending on if you get him for his peak and say maybe he does decline, you could just decline the option and not pick him up.
Right.
So they're pretty smart with that. With Corbin Carroll, he signed an 8-year deal with the Diamondbacks this past offseason for $111 million, which buys out all of his pre-ARB and post-ARB years, and it has a club option in 2031, I think the second to last year of the contract. So, say he declines rapidly, like speed's gone, bat to ball skills are gone, they could just move on from him, and hopefully they milked every last bit of baseball out of him. So looking at contracts like that, there's a couple players. There's at least one that I think needs to get done because this franchise seems to never lock up their young stars. And we talked about one last week. We talked about two, actually, because we mentioned a couple names, either last episode or a week before. But Bobby Witt Jr. literally has to be the face of the Kansas City Royals. Because I watched a video, shout out to Jolly Olive, about what Bobby Witt could be for the Royals. And I forgot how many good players played for the Royals in like the early 2000s. You got Carlos Beltran was one that they didn't lock up, that they ended up trading away. Johnny Damon was on the Royals. They ended up trading him away as well. So those are two guys that could have been franchise icons on the team. Even the World Series years, they didn't lock up Eric Hosmer. They didn't lock up Moustakas. Right. They didn't lock up Lorenzo Cain. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's kind of probably a good thing they didn't do that because a lot of those guys didn't age well. But going off of recency bias at that time, it made sense that, maybe they should keep if they kept that group together, maybe they could have made a run or two. You never know what's going to happen because, they were never the best players. They just played really well together. And at the end of the day, all you really care about is winning. So no matter what their contract looks like, if you win a World Series or two, then you don't care because money's money. It'll recuperate later down the line. In terms of Bobby Witt, we've seen him blossom into probably arguably next season. I think a lot of people are going to rank him as the number one or number two best shortstop in baseball. And that's just purely based on one, his age, his defense, his speed. And he's cut down on the strikeouts, which were really bad for him last year. And he can definitely be like a 25, 30 homer guy, 30 stolen bases, a gold glover that is hitting 2 or 3 in that Royals lineup. So I really don't see that. I don't see them realistically signing him to a long-term deal just because they haven't shown in the past. But that's someone, if I'm the Royals front office, that they have no direction right now. Their direction should just be how do we build around Bobby Witt and how do we sign him to a long-term deal to be the face of the Royals, because they really haven't had a franchise icon since George Brett. That's like a long time ago. So they're definitely a franchise that's begging for a star. Another one that's similar is probably for the Reds, Ellie De La Cruz. He's kind of slowing down a little bit this year. I think he's hitting like 235 right now. So they're in no need to sign him to an extension. But it's definitely one of those guys. They also aren't the type of team that gives out these big contracts to guys. So why not be smart, play it safe, sign them when they're young, when these players really just want security at this age. So they're more than likely to sign it. So those are two players that I think would be benefit really well from signing a long-term extensions for their clubs because they can be franchise icons for their teams for the next 15 years.
Yeah, I love the Bobby Witt one. Obviously, actually, I wrote down both of them. I wrote down Stott, Bohm, Ellie, and Witt. But the Bobby one just makes too much sense. He looks like a Royal. He just looks like he'd fit that vibe and would be fun there. Like you said, it's gonna be tough just because of his superstardom already. I don't know who his agent is either, but obviously he's gonna want his money, and then he's already got MLB father and stuff like that. So they know the drill. They've been through this before. It's not going to be the easiest thing, but it should be their top priority because that's the only way you win. I mean, you have to start somewhere, like you said. That's definitely your guy. You can't get much better than him, so why not try? The Ellie one's good too. Obviously, they're like you said, they don't need to be in a rush. He's been really bad recently. I think he's been hitting 183 in the last month or so. It's crazy to think about, but that's going to be a guy that turns around. You don't know if he'll ever come back to that crazy start that he had, but he's definitely going to be a above average player. There's just two guys that deserve contracts, and most guys, if you want to be competitive in the next few years, man, and in the long term future, honestly, you need to start paying these guys and committing and showing that you want to go towards winning because that's what these teams are doing now. They're signing guys, adding on, and then the guys are buying in, and now you have these squads like the Phillies, like the Dodgers, like the Padres. Not this year, but the other years. Like these guys just want to win, and winning is just it's contagious, and that's just what you need to build. And young winning is even better than that.
Yeah, I honestly kind of want to get your opinion because I was just thinking of it over the weekend, and it kind of just came back into my head. I think a team that could benefit from this, like signing their young stars now, is the Nationals, because it seems like they've been beat twice with not locking up franchise icons, and Bryce Harper, who they lost in 2019,
Right.
and then Juan Soto, who didn't end up coming to terms with their contract extension offers, and they ended up shipping him away to the Padres. And we've mentioned already this episode of some of the players that they got in return. They overhauled their roster, and let me tell you, dude, I was there in DC over the weekend, and these guys are playing with a lot of heart, and they've made a lot of improvements. I watched Mackenzie Gore and CJ Abrams when they were on the Padres, and Gore has an ERA almost near 5 this year, but he showed a lot of stuff. The biggest dude that's taken the biggest leap has been Abrams, dude. He is becoming a really good hitter, base runner. I think I'm 50-50 on him at defense, I guess. I mean, shortstop's such a premier position to be elite defensively at. There's only so many. And when you have the offensive trade-offs, that he can bring it to you, you'll definitely take that over anything. I dealt with Corey Seager, who was a liability at shortstop for a while. So I definitely think the Nationals would benefit the most. It seems like they have a plan. They just signed Dave Martinez to extension. They just signed Mike Rizzo to an extension. So this team, I think, if you're going to do rebuilding right, you kind of got to look at the way the Nationals did it. The only thing that's probably bitten them in the ass right now has been the whole Strasburg thing, because actually what was interesting is when I went there, he was supposed to do his retirement press conference and they canceled it because apparently behind the scenes, the family that's taking over the Nationals ownership group doesn't want to pay him the money. So they're going back and forth with that. So I'm interested to see what happens with that. But other than that, I mean, I feel like the Nationals are prime, maybe not next year, but probably the next 3 years to take a little bit of that next step, because I don't really see the Mets competing super well unless they're David Stearns really turns around that franchise. It seems like they're a little bit lost. The Phillies, I mean, they're going to be there, but the Braves are obviously the juggernaut they're signed long term. But the Marlins, the Mets, they could be the bottom dwellers in the next year, and the Nationals, with that extra playoff spot, they could definitely make a run, and I could definitely see them just falling under peer pressure to sign some of these guys.
Yeah, it's scary kind of looking at them, because we talked a lot of shit on them last year. Like you mentioned, C.J. Abrams, he was one of the worst hitters in baseball last year. I was going to mention Josiah Gray. I thought that's what you were going to say, but Josiah Gray's made leaps and bounds.
Yeah.
From last year to this year. If you want prolonged success, that's just the way you got to do it for these mid-market teams. I mean, what team has gone out there without buying some sort of players and been good for a long period of time? You know what I mean? Like Houston's a bigger market, LA's a big market, Boston, Philly. These teams are going to keep winning, keep being able to supply. If you're a team like the Nationals, if you don't have at least a few of these guys locked up, man, you're screwed. You're going to turn around just like they did the last few years. Fucking Soto, Harper, Turner, and Scherzer, like all these guys are just losing because they can't commit either way because they don't have enough money. Like if you want to commit to winning, you have to have the fun, you have to have the ability, and if you want to commit to rebuild, you have to have the ability. They're kind of just stuck in the middle now because their guys are actually developing much quicker than I think most people anticipated, but that's where they're kind of at now. I agree with you. If they want to win, I mean, I don't want them to win, obviously, because they're my division, but for their best sake, at least a few of these guys, like Mackenzie Gore has been great. CJ Abrams is probably one of my favorite guys in this.
Lane Thomas. There's a bunch of guys you can name on this team that are young and controllable. So I definitely think there will be a team to look at these next few off seasons to see what they'll do. But speaking of winning, one team that's not doing a lot of it is the Texas Rangers, who have seemingly in the past weeks have dropped all the way from first to third, out of a playoff spot, back into a playoff spot, now in second, I think. That entire division's kind of going up and down all over the place. But the Rangers, they have been on a very, very bad spiral these past couple months. When I took these notes a couple days ago, I looked at their record since the All-Star break, and they were pretty much close to a 500 ball club, 28-25 record since the All-Star break. They are 15-12 in August, 11-13 in July, and they were under 500 at that time at 5-6 in September. I think maybe they have I think they're 7-6.
I think
now.
they won a couple games.
Yeah. So, but either way, they've been playing 500 or about that. And that's something that is very concerning, especially as we get closer and closer to September, because they're like one bad week away from not only not winning the division, but missing the playoffs entirely. So if you're a Rangers fan, how worried would you be?
For right now, not terribly worried. I say that being a Phillies fan who collapsed in September every year, but not terribly worried. I know they've been so as of Wednesday they lost 14-18. As of June, they were 6.5 games up on the division at the end of June, and now they are a half game back. Their bullpen has been terrible. 4.86 bullpen ERA, 26 saves and 29 blown saves is fucking astronomical to me how you can have more blown saves than saves. Their Chapman, one of their biggest moves, isn't working out. But there's not a ton of competition out there. Like you have the Mariners who's coming up on you. You have the Blue Jays, who's about the only other team that could battle you for that extra wild card spot. I guess Yankees or Red Sox are still in it. But it's not for right now. Like I said, I think it's for the playoffs. I guess you have some starting pitching. You have a lot of injuries with Max Scherzer down now too. I think it's definitely a good start because nobody really expected him to be this good. It's just going to be. I think it's just going to be disappointing from the playoffs because it's going to be a quick exit. I think that's just what it's built to be.
Yeah, I mean, you already mentioned it. Max Scherzer being out for the rest of the season, that was their big pickup at the deadline. It seems like all the starting pitching that they either signed or traded for this year or the past year have kind of, I wouldn't say backfired, but like shit happens.
Yeah.
Scherzer, they trade for, gets hurt. Evaldi, when he's on the field and healthy, he's arguably probably the best pitcher in the American League, definitely in that division. He was pitching lights out. Since he's came back from his injury, he's kind of been 50-50, and they don't know what they're honestly going to get out of him. He's one bad pitch away from probably his career just being over.
Right.
And that's something that would scare me as a Rangers fan, especially this season and beyond. And then they signed Jacob deGrom last offseason, to that big deal. And he only made it past barely a month in the season, and he ended up having to get Tommy John. So, you mentioned the bullpen too. The bullpen has been awful for the Rangers, and they tried to fix it. So I'm not going to knock them for not trying because they traded for some big names, and the biggest one was Aroldis Chapman. And, looking at his ERA, you wouldn't think he's been having a bad year, but the save opportunities and the blown saves for the Rangers this year is just awful. It seems like even if they get out to a 4 or 5 run lead, that's not safe anymore. And the only way to offset a bad bullpen is elite starting pitching, and your pitching has to go deep into games. And I just feel like they don't have that anymore. The only positive they have right now is Corey Seager's playing out of his mind.
Mm-hmm.
Arguably, if he played a full season, you can even argue right now, I think he's going to finish runner-up in MVP. Between him, Ohtani, and probably J-Rod, would be the top 3.
Yeah, probably.
Just because of the way they've played in the second half.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, Ohtani, it's the Ohtani clause. He'll likely win just because he's Shohei Ohtani and he plays 2 positions, and he did it remarkably well at an elite level this year, even though he stopped last month because of the UCL tear. But Seager, dude, now he qualifies for he qualifies for all of it now. So he's leading the league in batting average at 347, hits, OPS, home. He's got 30 home runs in 120 games, which imagine if he played a whole full 162. I mean, I feel like as a Dodgers fan, I can attest to imagine if we had a Corey Seager for 162 games. Yeah, it would be unstoppable. Every year that he played in LA, I think the only year that he played over 140 or 50 games was his rookie year, and he finished runner-up to MVP to Chris Bryant. So, I mean, that just tells you the type of player he is. So he's carrying that offense, and he may be carrying them to a playoff berth if the pitching around him is going to falter like it is. So I think they still make the playoffs, because I feel like that division just has 3 teams, but that just means somebody that's good is missing it. The Blue Jays may miss it. I think I'm trying to think who else is in that wild card hunt.
There's not
in the
much.
American League. I feel like it's one of the West teams doesn't make it, or the Blue Jays don't make it, because I feel like the Rays and the Orioles, they're locks. In the American League, there's really not much between. It's not like the National League where there's like 7 teams like all fighting. So
God.
I feel like the Rangers, if they miss it, I don't know if they would be super disappointed because at least you have some excuses for why you didn't make it. But if I was a fan, I would probably be a little nervous. But they have been playing a little bit better this past week, and they're currently second place again. But the Mariners have been hot. They have the best record in baseball since the All-Star break. Better than the Braves, better than the Dodgers. So it'll be interesting to see how they play these last like 2.5 weeks, and if they can finally get over that hump and make the playoffs.
Yeah, I like what you said when you said the thing about the only thing that makes up for a bad bullpen is lead starting pitching. I think I don't love comparing everything to the Phillies, but this is a really similar team to the Phillies were last year. I think it was a scenario where you wanted in the beginning of the season, you would have been happy with the playoffs. You get in, your bullpen's been fucking bad. You're hitting a bunch. Your starting pitching's carrying. Well, not anymore because they're injured. But like you said, Evaldi's one of the most talented pitchers in baseball. DeGrom is probably the best pitcher in baseball when he's healthy. Max Scherzer is another top 10 pitcher in baseball when he's healthy. It's all these guys that could really win, but I think they just overachieved. I don't think that they're really faltering. I think it's that they're just coming back down to earth. I think it has to level at some point, and I think we're just getting that leveling point here. It's coming real rough, real rough for them. But like you said, it's still a playoff thing. Unless the Blue Jays can keep going, I think the Mariners make the playoffs too. So I think they make the playoffs, but it's not going to be a long stay for them.
Yeah, I'd be shocked if they make it past the wild card round because they would have to go up against one of these teams that we're already talking about, either the Mariners, possibly the Blue Jays, and then the Central Division winner, which, the Twins, in a short game series with the pitching they have, that's pretty scary. Sonny Gray, Joe Ryan, like those are guys that can shut you down. So it's not going to be any cakewalk even with their offense. But staying in the American League West, we talked about it a little bit last time about potentially Mike Trout going on the move. Well, now we're kind of hearing reports from the Angels side of things, and they said if it's been rumored by Bob Nightingale and other writers over there that if he does want to be moved, that the Angels are willing to oblige to that. So that can definitely shake up the offseason already. I'm interested to see, one, do you think he is traded? And two, if he's traded, like what are some teams that you definitely think would be interested that have a realistic shot?
Right. I mean, I don't know, man. It seems like all the time we talk about every year the Angels stutter at the end of the year, and then they're like, "Oh, we got to get Mike Trout out of there. We got to get him some playoff experience and some winning." But this is kind of the first time we ever really hear about them being like, "Yeah, fuck it, we'll trade him." Like it's like talk and then nothing's like it's kind of just in the atmosphere, but it seems more along the line now than ever. I mean, they've done some rash things recently, if you've noticed, with waiving half their team and then waiving them again after they didn't get picked up the first time. I think the biggest thing for it is going to be Ohtani, honestly. If I know we talked about it, the Angels are probably still one of the front runners for him. And if they can get him back, it doesn't make much sense for me to sign Ohtani and then trade Mike Trout. I know it's a lot of money, but that's kind of a win now thing. If Ohtani goes somewhere and is not in LA next year, I think it's a much higher possibility. Doesn't mean it's going to happen. So I think the possibility probably is still very low. I just think it's tough to trade somebody like that, man. It's tough. I saw they mocked a trade, and it was Bleacher Report mocked a trade to the Phillies for the Trout and $65 million for Castellanos and McAble, which first off would never ever happen because that's nowhere near enough for the Angels to trade Mike Trout. And second off, like what are we talking about here? It's he's got like $230 million on his contract or something left. It's so money's the biggest problem. It's always will be, and it always has been. If you looked at it without looking at the contracts, if you looked at the players and you said, "Do you want Mike Trout?" 29 out of 29 GMs would be like, "Yeah, obviously I want Mike Trout." But for him to get traded, it's going to have to be like a perfect package, a perfect situation, and a lot of shit we don't know about in Mike Trout's head right now.
Yeah, I definitely think so. The sentiment around the Angels, especially since Trout's debut, they actually have like I from his debut in 2012 to now, the Angels actually have a sub 500 record in that time, which is kind of crazy because they've had a lot of really good players play for those teams. You know, you got Albert Pujols, Mike Trout, Ohtani in these years. You know, they've had the star talent. They've tried to build around them, and it just hasn't worked. And we've seen people argue before, what's the best way to fix the Angels? It's probably trading Mike Trout. Like that's probably where it starts. You know, sometimes the toughest things to do is move on, and rip that Band-Aid off. But I think they missed their mark to trade him at his highest value because that would have been a couple years ago. That would have been like 2019 or 2020 or maybe even 2021, sometime prior before he signed that extension. Because at the end of the day, you know, it is Mike Trout. If you asked all the other GMs around baseball and they said, "Would you take Mike Trout?" like the player, they'd be like, "Oh yeah." I mean, look at the upside. You know, like if he gets healthy, you're talking about a perennial MVP candidate who hits above 300, hits 40 home runs, Hall of Famer, bound. If he's fully healthy, he's bound to be a top 10 player all time. And the amount of jerseys and stuff that he would sell would just pay for itself. But then you ask those same GMs, all right, well, his $35 million year salary that's due for another 7 years, would you take that with the health risk that he has? And I would say probably all but like 3 would say, yeah, we'll still take him.
Mm-hmm.
Because when it comes to trades, people kind of still don't understand. Because like when Betts was traded, like we just talked about the return package. Like even now talking about it, even then when those guys were prospects, it seemed like the Dodgers fleeced the deal. And the reason why they did is because the Red Sox involved David Price in that deal, which outweighed the contract value. So it lowered the value that was going back to Boston from LA. And that's kind of how trades work. It's not always player for player and stuff like that. Like you always have to think about the money involved too.
Mm-hmm.
So like you said, you mentioned that mock trade from Bleacher Report. I've read that article too. And I'm going to tell you right now, if the Angels are going to trade Trout, they're going to have to take the New York Mets approach. And they're going to have to include a lot more than $65 million to move him. You're talking about maybe over $100 million in cash going to a team, because I think you don't trade Trout just to trade Trout just to get him off the books. You trade Trout to get prospect value in return. I would rather just buy the prospects like the Mets did and get a better return. Say, all right, we'll pay $100 million of the remainder of his salary, so we can get like some of your top 5 prospects, and you're getting perhaps a Hall of Famer. And if he's healthy, playing on a winning team, maybe you guys handle him better. He gets to play playoff baseball and end his career happy. We get some good prospects so we can begin our rebuild, because now we've lost Trout. We're likely losing Ohtani. That's where the Angels kind of have to start brainstorming. And we don't know who's going to be running the Angels next year, because it seems like, I imagine most of those guys are going to get fired. The owner has flirted with selling the team. He may revisit that. We don't know if it's going to be the same owner. So maybe a new owner comes in. He's like, trade Trout. I'm buying the team for Mike Trout. Like he's marketable. Like that's a guy I want on the team. So it really just depends. And at the end of the day, you know, Trout, like I mentioned last week, he dug his own grave with the contract extension. I get he probably wanted to spend his career with one team. Like that's if I'm like a player, if I'm thinking of like my dream thing is like I want to sign with one team, play for that one team, and I want to win a championship for that one team. But the writing was on the wall that the Angels weren't that team to do it with. So, um, in terms of teams that I realistically think have a shot, there's probably only like 2 or 3, and I'm just gonna go on with it. Join the bandwagon. The Phillies are definitely on there as long as David Dombrowski's still the manager there and running the show. Because if I think I could imagine them getting rid of a top prospect if the Angels pay a majority of that salary. All these teams I'm mentioning, it's like the Angels have to send at least 100 million. Would the Phillies send one of their top pitching prospects? Say if they sign maybe Nola to a contract, then some of these guys are expendable. Like obviously you would like to keep them, but realistically you could trade them. I don't think Castellanos would make sense in a trade like that. Like he doesn't have that long term of a deal. Like you might as well just ride that contract out. But Trout's from the area. He's always been rumored there. He was rumored to maybe test free agency and go there, and that didn't end up happening. But I definitely could see that as a likelihood, and that could be someone that like imagine in an era of everyone building super teams, like you got Betts and Freeman, you got Acuna, Olsen, and all them over there. We've seen other teams in the past, but maybe Dave Dombrowski's like, you know what? Let me just put together the 2 probably most popular players in baseball since 2012 in Harper and Trout, and they would both be playing the outfield together in those seasons. So that would be something to look forward. Another team that I've been mentioning high, the Cubs. I feel like another pinstripe team. I feel like the Cubs maybe could make a fit for that and the reason I think that is I think Bellinger's in line to get a really good contract this offseason. And say if the Cubs don't get that, maybe they switch to the trade market and they see a guy who's already locked up long term. They got a lot of good prospects in the minor leagues that I imagine they would trade for Mike Trout, plug him in center, and there you go. Now the Cubs have their own new face of the franchise to pair with Dansby Swanson over there. So, and then the last one, I mean, I feel like a trade like this for an aging superstar, I feel like you have to put the Yankees in there just for that reason alone. And, that was Trout's favorite team. I imagine he would waive a trade there. But that's also just another team that's in limbo, but they obviously have a much better chance to fix it or right the ship than the Angels do. So I would say the likelihood of him getting traded is probably at like 25-ish% or less. But it really just depends on how this offseason goes. Maybe there's some things. Maybe he really does one out. And I imagine if he really does one out and he really is like adamant about that, I think they may actually just try in whatever they can to do it to try to just get him out.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't know. I mean, we never really see Mike Trout have that much of a personality in that kind of aspect. But I mean, I'd be pissed off too. Like you said, the writing was kind of on the wall when he signed that big deal. But yeah, he never could have known that they were going to go out and do all these terrible things and not win at all. Like it's not necessarily his fault. I like what you said though. I did not even think about the Cubs. Cubs are an interesting one. You miss out on a Bellinger, and then you go get Mike Trout. They already have a really good team. I mean, they're going to compete. They're going to make the playoffs this year. Or in the playoff hunt this year. It's definitely a good landing spot for him. Yankees makes a lot of sense, just because it seems like they always have guys that are around 30 or over 30 making a lot of money like every year, like Stanton and Donaldson and just random fucking people. I wanted to talk on the Phillies though, because I like what you said, Dave Dombrowski. I wanted to say it earlier. I didn't get a chance. It seems like Dave Dombrowski comes into these franchises and builds this mega house and just wrecks them and then dips.
He's like, all right, I'm out.
Yeah, like let's go win a championship and then I'm gonna leave and then y'all can deal with that. Bloom just saw it in Boston. I like it. I mean, I don't like it, but I like championships. So fuck it. Like you said, if what I would have to get is it would have to be over 100 million. But I would be willing to part ways with like one of the center fielders. So either Rojas, Pache, Marsh, one of the top prospects, not Painter, probably. and then another prospect too. If you're going to give me $100 and some million with
If
it.
they're not gonna give you a lot of cash, I've seen other people say this is what they'll likely have to do. They'll probably have to take a Boston approach where they attach a player that is significantly less value.
Right.
And I've seen one player that's been linked is Anthony Rendon, where maybe a team takes him. I don't see the Phillies doing that because they have Bohm. The only way they would do that is maybe if the Angels say, we want Alec Bohm. That's the only way I could see that happening. But I could see other teams like I could see the Yankees taking I could see the Yankees taking maybe a chance on Rendon if they made that move. The Cubs kind of are in the same situation with that as well. They don't really have a primary third baseman. I think it's been like a platoon
Yeah,
with like Patrick Wisdom and a couple other guys. So, I mean, Rondon's just really been hurt. I mean, he's a really good hitter when he's really healthy. He's just an asshole, but maybe a change of scenery, it never hurts anybody. So maybe that's what it does. But those are the type of things you would have to think about in a trade this size. Cause I don't think it would just be a one for like 3 players from the other team. It would have to be like maybe if you're going to go full rebuild, maybe try to get like 2 or 3 players from the Angels to another team so you can get like more players in return. Or if the Phillies wanted to lessen, or a team wanted to lessen the impact of that return, take on one of these bad contracts like Anthony Rendon and stuff like that, or Tyler Anderson, someone like similar in that area. So I could definitely see a lot of teams being interested in that route. It just really depends on what the Angels want to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's just yeah, it's what the Angels want to do. I mean, if you want the money, like you said earlier, they're not you're not going to trade Mike Trout to dump him. You're not just going to trade him to trade him. You're going to trade him. Yeah, you may have to spend some money. You may have to give whatever team gets him more money, but you're going to want something to show for. Like, could you imagine if Bloom traded Mookie Betts and oh, we only paid for 20 million of his contract, but we only got Jeter Downs. Like that was the only thing we got. Like fucking Boston would have flipped out. No, could you imagine? I could not imagine if the Angels traded Trout and got like one prospect, even if they didn't give that much money, it would make sense, financial sense for him. But I just don't think like PR wise and everything that would make sense at all.
No, I mean, whoever trades Trout would be labeled for that for the rest of their career. So, obviously, the current Angels president of baseball ops didn't want to do that either. He didn't trade Ohtani. So, I definitely think whoever's in there, I don't think he would be the one to do it. So, it would have to be someone new. But, anything can happen in baseball. I've seen some crazy trades the past 2-3 years. So, I'm not going to rule it out. I think as a baseball fan, I think it would be fun to see him finally move on and join another team to finally get at least he doesn't even need to make the playoffs. Just to give him opportunity to like be in a playoff push would just be let alone worth it. Because we saw all these players in the WBC and he was the highlight of like smile on his face. I mean, everyone else on that roster seemed to have some type of postseason experience or even a World Series, like you got Trey Turner, Betts, Arenado, like he's made the playoffs a bunch of years with the Cardinals and a couple seasons with the Rockies. So definitely, I feel like it's time, but it just depends on if the Angels do it. Getting ready to close out the show. We'll talk a little bit, like we mentioned already, there's around 2 weeks left of the season. The first round of the wild card matches will be starting in the first week of October. And the Atlanta Braves are the first team not only to clinch a postseason spot, but they're also first team to clinch their division. And they did it in Philadelphia to a roaring of boos. Couple of hot takes. We may have to take some videos of what they were saying over there. Did you see the video of Brian Sticker saying to Acuna, "You're going to play on the World Series this year"? I feel like you got to screenshot that one. You got to video record that one. So, because we already talked about it numerous times. I mean, I'm ready for another Phillies Braves NLDS. I feel like that's just like an electric matchup.
Yeah.
The current wild card right now with the Phillies seems like a really good matchup between the Cubs and the Phillies because you got a lot of pitching matchups, with Justin Steele probably matching up against Wheeler in that game 1. And then a lot of offensive might in that one with Harper, Bellinger, and all these other guys that are on those teams. So But the Braves are the first team to clinch, similar to last year's Dodgers, where they clinched well into early September. And it doesn't always matter, it doesn't matter when you clinch. But there are a couple teams that are getting ready to clinch, not only a postseason berth, but also their division. The Orioles and the Rays are currently battling out for their division, but they both are very close to clinching a postseason spot. I know you probably have more of the magic numbers that you can go down, but then the other team is the Dodgers. I know their magic number. I think is like 3 as of today, and that's just not only to clinch the division, but just I think that is to clinch the division, yeah, for both. So that's definitely probably going to happen sometime tomorrow if they win tonight and or someone loses these next 2 days.
Yeah, it's going to be crazy. The Braves thing, what I'm going to hate on it because it's the Braves, but like they didn't really do anything crazy. I mean, they celebrated on the field. That's what I would do. I don't like that I don't know if it's a league-wide thing. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't like that the Phillies put congratulations, fucking NL East champions. Unless that's like a mandated thing, that's dumb.
The only time I think that's okay is because I've seen it happen twice.
Yeah.
Is when the away team won the World Series at LA.
That's fine.
And they congratulated that way because I feel like at the end of the day, that's the only time you should. I guess seeing it on like the screen at the stadium is it is kind of a bad look, but I don't think they did anything else like posted on social media, but it is a little weird
it was
that
just
they were like, congrats Braves.
Right.
Because if I'm a player on the Phillies and they brought this up on a couple episodes I watched, I wonder how many players for the Phillies side stayed in the dugout over the railing and watched.
I watched it and I saw Reese Hoskins was pissed off. Nick Castellanos was watching. Somebody else was out there watching. It was one of the pitchers, but they stayed out there and watched it, and I like that, man. I usually don't watch that kind of stuff, but I watched it. Yeah, exactly. You use it. It sometimes it's corny, but if it works, it works, dude. Like I don't care. I think, like you said, the World Series thing, obviously. I don't know who it is. I'm trying to figure it out. Somebody plays Seattle, or Seattle plays somebody in the NL this weekend, and they're probably going to clinch. I could see that happen because it's like 2 different leagues. Like, okay, congratulate the person in the other league. Like, put a little thing up on the.
I think it's us. I think it's the Dodgers.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, because we're playing in Seattle today.
Right, like put something up for the Dodgers. Like, who cares? Like, you're not going to see them. You're not making the World Series. Like, it doesn't matter. But that's just okay. That's just the that's just the start. Yeah, it's gonna be crazy, man. I had the NL is the one I really looked at. You still have a bunch of teams that could still make it. The Phillies playoff magic number is down to 12 now. Cubs is at 13, and surprisingly, the only other team, the third wild card team, I guess the fourth wild card team that could control their own destiny is the Giants. If the Giants won every game, they would make the playoffs over the Reds and the Diamondbacks because they have 2 less games played than everybody. They're 75 and 71, and the other teams are 76 and 72. So that's kind of crazy to think about. Obviously, that's probably not going to happen, but yeah, a lot of crazy things could go on. Towards the bottom, more so.
Yeah,
it seems like the top's pretty much done.
Yeah, you mentioned before the show about like how technically like the Dodgers could finish as like the 6th seed if like everything terrible happened. And the Giants, they kind of really do control their own destiny because I mentioned it to you before, but they play LA, I think 8 more times or 7 more times. And I imagine they're going to play those series tough. And, the Dodgers have to too, because I know we like to shit on the Brewers a lot, but like they're kind of keeping pace for that, their division lead, but they're also trying to get maybe a potential 2nd seed. I don't see that really happening because I find it very hard to imagine, even if the Dodgers, because I think the Dodgers don't give a shit about this month because they already know they're going to win the division. They're kind of trying to prepare their rookie starters for the playoffs because they're letting their guys go deeper into games. They're trying to test them out. And I even asked, like when I was in the pregame, a couple of reporters asked Roberts that, and they were like, "Are you like kind of testing the waters for some of these guys, because he got a lot of questions about putting Bobby Miller back out there in the seventh, I think, who ended up blowing the game by giving up a 2-run homer. And he was like, yeah, I'm kind of just trying to see how they react, what their limits are, because I find it hard to imagine like later in the postseason that I see him sending out some of these guys in the seventh inning. Like, I find it very hard to imagine that many starters on the LA's rotation are going to go past like 5 innings. So that's definitely, the Giants could technically like play their hearts out, and maybe they take a series, or maybe both the series, and then because they're fighting for their lives for a playoff match. I kind of want to see him make the playoffs because I would really like to see another NLDS between them.
It's like the Padres.
All right, we're ending it now. I'm just kidding. No, but I definitely think it would be interesting because that 2021 NLDS between those two was really exciting, kind of similar to what the Braves and the Phillies were last year. And even though the Dodgers ended up on the short end of the stick last year, those games were pretty exciting and heartbreaking at the same time for me. So that's definitely what I want to see in the playoffs. So definitely be on the lookout as we get closer to that postseason push, because we're going to be having a lot of content, whether it's articles or the podcast or anything on our social media. So we're definitely getting ready for October, because that's when things get real interesting and at least both of our teams are going to be in the playoffs. So again, that doesn't happen often. So, other than that, probably does it for today's episode. So we'll definitely be back same time or similar to next week. So just be on the lookout for any more content.
Go Phils.